Huh?
Shit.
She bringing it to us?
Oriental kid, man.
Fuck out of here, man.
This bitch is crazy.
I like him like that.
Let's take this bitch.
Stop! Go!
You shouldn't have fucked with her.
Man, you fucking crazy, man. Get out of here.
You get your ass up out of here before I kick your old wrinkly white ass. Motherfucker crazy.
The fuck?
The movie opens with Walter Kowalski standing silent and stern at his wife Dorothy's funeral. The church is crowded, but his grandchildren show up looking indifferent, dressed as if they were heading to the mall. They whispered, joked, and fidgeted, completely out of place in the solemn atmosphere. Walter's son noticed his father's cold, stern gaze. As Father Janovich gave the sermon, Walter's granddaughter Ashley didn't even bother to pretend she was listening. Ashley absent-mindedly scrolled through her phone, bored as she checked her messages. During the memorial, the grandchildren went down to the basement and stumbled upon dusty old photos and war medals. Walter said nothing, true to his nature of refusing help and insisting on doing everything himself, no matter how small. Outside, a quiet neighbor boy named Thao quietly appeared at the service. The boy came to borrow some tools, but Walter turned him away. Back in the garage, he caught Ashley secretly smoking. Walter didn't scold her, and Ashley casually asked who would inherit the old couch and, more importantly, the car when he died. Walter stayed silent, but the answer was clear. To him, the 1972 Ford Gran Torino meant more than most people around him. Father Janovich often visited, trying to keep his last promise to Dorothy, convincing Walter to go to confession for peace of mind. But Walter had no interest. To him, church was his wife's thing, not his. He dismissed the advice of a 27-year-old priest who had never faced life's hardships. Walter simply told him to save the sermons for someone who truly wanted salvation. Walter had spent his life working on the Ford assembly line, fiercely loyal to American-made machines. So when he saw his neighbors performing traditional rituals, he showed open contempt, viewing them as little more than savages. When Father Janovich came again, trying to reach out once more, Walter finally lost his patience. Walter harshly criticized the young priest, calling him a weakling who only held the hands of dying old women and preached fairy tales about eternity. Meanwhile, Thao's life was slipping into danger. On the street, he was harassed by a Mexican gang and was only freed when his cousins, who called themselves the Spider Gang, showed up. They chased the others away, then immediately turned their attention to Thao. They pressured Thao to join, promising protection if he agreed. He tried to refuse but couldn't shake them off. Not long after, while he was tending the garden, they cornered him again. Spider coldly pointed at the shiny Gran Torino nearby, a clear warning. That same night, Father Janovich even followed Walter to a bar, still clinging to Dorothy's final wish. Hardened by brutal memories of the Korean War, Walter had no patience for moral lessons from someone who only knew battles from books. At midnight, he heard noises in the garage. Heart racing, he grabbed his rifle and went to check, catching someone trying to steal the Gran Torino. He raised his gun but suddenly staggered, losing his balance. A gunshot rang out. Frightened, Thao ran into the darkness. From then on, Walter began building defenses. He loaded his rifle and reinforced every corner of the house as if bracing for battle. Though the war was decades past, he felt it lurking just outside the door. His son called, but the conversation quickly fell into silence. It was clear his son only called when it served his own interests, and Walter had little interest in small talk or forced connections. Meanwhile, Spider kept hanging around the neighborhood trying to recruit Thao into the gang. This time, Thao firmly refused. When Spider and his crew returned to force him into the car, his whole family rushed out to intervene. Chaos broke out, and the fight quickly spilled onto Walter's lawn. Moments later, the door burst open. Walter charged out with his rifle in hand. He stared down Spider and made it clear what would happen if they didn't back off. The gang retreated, tossing threats, but their swagger faded in Walter's presence. Thao's family was shaken yet deeply grateful. The next morning, they appeared at his door with flowers and food, a simple but heartfelt gesture of thanks. But Walter greeted them with a scowl and his loaded rifle. He didn't want their gratitude and tossed all the gifts into the trash. Sue's sister, fluent in English, tried to bridge the gap with kindness, but Walter barely acknowledged her. Soon after, Father Janovich returned once more, still persistent in trying to reach him. He asked why Walter never called the police during the gang attacks. Walter just shrugged, saying he once prayed they would come, but no one ever did. A single mistake could have spilled blood on the lawn. The priest patiently encouraged him to open up about the past, explaining that men like Walter could only find peace by admitting the orders they once followed in war. Walter nodded in agreement. Elsewhere, while Sue was out with her date, 3 thugs suddenly surrounded her. They mocked and cornered her. She stood firm, but was outnumbered.
Mom, she bringing it to us?
Orient kids, man.
Fuck out of here.
Huh?
Shit.
Like that.
Let's take this bitch.
He tell us a lesson, that's what you
Stop!
Just then, Walter's truck pulled up. He stepped
fucking
out,
crazy,
silent
man.
and calm.
Get your ass up out of
The
here.
thugs laughed at the old man until they saw the gun in his hand. Instantly, the atmosphere shifted. Without a word, Walter made them understand the consequences if they didn't back off. The threat was quiet but deadly serious. They retreated, and he drove Sue away from danger. On the way home, he scolded her for being with a boyfriend who wouldn't even lift a finger to protect her. Sue stayed silent, offering no reply. Instead of explaining, she told Walter about her people, the Hmong, from the highlands of Laos, Vietnam, and southern China. They had fought alongside the Americans during the war, but when the U.S. withdrew, North Vietnam hunted them down. Her family came here seeking survival. In Walter's world, young men like Thao often faced the harshest trials. Meanwhile, Walter's own children felt sad when they realized they had stopped trying to understand him. On his birthday, they brought gifts that insulted him, a big button phone and a grab stick. Then they hinted it was time for him to move into a nursing home. Walter said nothing, but threw the gifts straight out of the house, still in their hands. Later, Sue saw Walter sitting alone on the porch with a beer. She invited him to the family barbecue. Walter grumbled and refused, but she joked that the only rule was he couldn't touch the dog meat because they only ate cat. Her words made him laugh. Soon after, Walter walked across the lawn and tried one of the neighbors' homemade beers. Inside, Sue's grandmother looked at Walter with cold eyes, as if seeing her own reflection only older, harsher, and American. The others watched him like an animal in a zoo. Walter said little, but he understood what he saw, a family bound by tradition, loyalty, and respect, things missing from his own bloodline. Then the cough returned. Clear-headed, Walter quietly went upstairs, stepped into the bathroom, took a deep breath, and looked in the mirror. Sitting down with another beer, he silently admitted he felt closer to the slant-eyed boy than to his own troubled family. At last, he began to eat seriously. A warmth spread inside Walter, easing him little by little. Sue urged him downstairs where the kids gathered and, unlike the adults, spoke fluent English. When Walter arrived, I was sitting alone. He cheerfully struck up a conversation with a girl named Yua, then nudged Thao, teasing him for sitting quietly. The girl seemed amused. Walter called out Thao for sitting silently all night like a rock. He teased him, trying to spark some pride, and it worked. Slowly, things began to change. Walter started enjoying the food his neighbors brought, no longer throwing it away, but accepting it. One day, Thao's mother went to see Walter and insisted that her son redeem the family's shame by working for him right away. Walter tried to refuse, but she would not give in. The next morning, Walter told Thao to go outside and count birds as a simple test. He kept testing Thao to wear him out, but the boy stayed strong and never complained. Impressed, Walter gave him real work, fixing up the house together, even as his cough grew worse. At the hospital, Dr. Chu suggested a full checkup. The results were bad. Walter said little, but he understood what they meant. He called his son, hoping to tell the truth, but the conversation went nowhere. The distance between them grew. Meanwhile, Spider remained angry. Thao's failed attempt to steal the Gran Torino was an insult to the gang, and now they were ready for revenge. Walter sensed the danger and chose to take real action. He began teaching Thao like a grandson, showing him basic skills such as working with his hands and fixing broken things. Thao was amazed by Walter's garage, where every tool was neatly arranged with care. For Thao, it felt like stepping into a whole new world. Walter gave him a basic toolkit with pliers, tape, and rust spray enough to fix half the problems in a house. It was like a valuable passport. When Walter couldn't move the heavy refrigerator from the basement on his own, he finally set aside his pride and asked for help. Thao stepped in, offering to lift the heavier side, but Walter stayed stubborn and barked orders. Thao refused to back down, saying he wanted proper guidance if he was to help. It was a turning point. He was not only learning skills but also building confidence. From then on, Thao and Walter acted like a real family. Thao carefully washed the Gran Torino, helped in the garden, and worried about Walter's constant smoking and persistent cough. He once shared his dream of working in sales like Walter's eldest son, but Walter just laughed, dismissing it as legal stealing. Thao had few options, no college, no diploma, and no clear path ahead, so Walter promised to help him find a job, but first he had to learn proper manners. They started at the barbershop where Walter explained that men talk about work, girlfriends, or cars to express themselves. The barbers joined in, giving Thao a crash course in confidence, speaking clearly, standing tall, and carrying himself with pride.
Excuse me, sir. I need a haircut. If you ain't too busy, you old Italian son of a bitch prick barber. Boy, does my ass hurt from all the guys in my construction job.
Walter took Thao to a construction site and introduced him to a foreman friend. Thao made a good impression and was quickly hired. Soon after, Walter gave him a tool belt simple but meaningful, which deeply moved Thao. But the peace didn't last. One evening, as Thao walked home from work, Spider's gang ambushed him, beating him, stealing his tools, and burning his face with a lit cigarette. When Walter saw Thao's injuries, he was furious. Though Thao refused to retaliate, Walter couldn't let it go. He tracked down one of the gang members, beat him badly, and pulled a gun with a clear warning: stay away from Thao or face the consequences. Things quieted down for a while. In that calm, Thao gathered his courage and asked Yua out. Walter was proud and even let Thao use the Gran Torino for his first date with Yua. The car, his most treasured possession, had become a symbol of trust. But the night soon turned into a nightmare. The Mong family's house was riddled with bullets. No one was killed, but Thao was cut on the neck. And Yua never made it to her aunt's house as planned. Hours later, Yua was left at her doorstep in a terrible state, bruised, bloodied, and broken in both body and spirit. Walter collapsed, crushed by guilt, knowing he had triggered the gang's violence by humiliating one of them. In a rage, he lost control, smashing furniture and mirrors until his hands bled, trembling and exhausted. Soon after, Father Janovich arrived. He had just returned from taking Sue to the hospital. The whole family was paralyzed with fear, and no one dared speak to the police. Without witnesses, the authorities were powerless. The violence would continue unless someone had the courage to end it. That night, Walter quietly poured a light drink and shared it with Father Janovich. The young priest admitted he was angry, too angry at the violence, the fear, and the helplessness. The next morning, Thao came to Walter's door, his eyes burning with rage. He wasn't seeking comfort, he came for justice, believing Walter wouldn't let it go. Thao was ready to fight, but Walter stopped him. Walter had made enough mistakes to know where revenge leads, and he didn't want Thao to carry that burden. He told the boy to go home and think. Then Walter took a bath, letting the silence wash over his weary body. Afterward, he went to the barbershop, where Martin the barber, who had teased him for years, gave him one final trim. Walter then went to a tailor and ordered a neatly fitted black suit. It was clear he was preparing for an ending. He kept his promise. Walter entered the church and stepped into the confessional. Father Janovich was surprised when it ended almost as soon as it began. Walter admitted only one thing: he had let his sons down. That was all. The priest urged him to leave with a peaceful heart. Walt then met Thao one last time to say goodbye. He gave him a rifle and his most sacred possession, the Silver Star Medal. He spoke of the fateful night in Korea when he killed more than a dozen men in battle and was the only one to survive. Walter spoke seriously, saying that killing is the heaviest burden a person can carry, and it never goes away. No matter what Thao wanted, he would not let him bear that weight for life. He was proud of Thao and the man he was becoming, but he would not let revenge destroy him. Walter left his loyal dog with Sue's grandmother, then called Sue to tell her where the basement key was hidden. Father Janovich and the police kept watch for hours near the gang's hideout, but everything stayed quiet. Nothing happened. Eventually, they were ordered to withdraw, taking the priest with them. Once the coast was clear, Walter made his move. He stepped into the street, facing the gang alone. With no support beside him, Walter showed no fear. He mocked the gang, calmly lighting a cigarette, every move deliberate and calculated. Then he pointed his hand like a gun and slowly reached into his coat. In an instant, the gang opened fire. Walter fell to the ground, unconscious. Walter wasn't holding a gun, only a lighter. He died unarmed, but his sacrifice was not in vain. It forced the authorities to act, the gang was wiped out, and justice was finally served. The violence came to an end. Later, Sue Thao and Father Janovich gathered to say their goodbyes. The priest admitted that only after meeting Walter Kowalski did he truly understand the meaning of life and death. At the funeral, the Hmong community wore traditional clothing to honor Walter, who had always stood by them. When the will was read, his family sat in silence, shocked to receive nothing. The house was left to the church, while the Gran Torino went to Thao with one condition: no chopped roof, No flashy spoilers and no gaudy paint jobs.